actually went to, shockingly enough, I went to engineering college. And back then I also was a politics nerd. And there was no one to discuss politics with. And one of the friends I'd made actually in college was, I'm going to protect his identity, but his last name was Kumar. And we only spoke about politics. Our friendship, we used to just meet and do addas and have singharas and chai and discuss politics. It was a very interesting thing. And one of the things that Kumar told me was that he was from Balyan, Uttar Pradesh. He said, Shoaib, पता है उत्तर प्रदेश is so communal that वहाँ पर त्योहारों पर भी electricity आता है जाता है. He said something like that. And he said that when the Samajwadi party is in power, there is electricity during Eid. And when the BJP is in power, there is electricity during Diwali. So I was, I think, 18 or 19 at that time, and I didn't know anything about Uttar Pradesh, and it really did have a very good reputation anyway. So I was like, okay, this must be kind of true. This is how Uttar Pradesh kind of works. And I kind of forgot about this anecdote. And I recently learned about the fact that it's actually false. Kumar was just bullshitting me. So this is not true. I learned about it in Love, Jihad and Other Fictions, where the authors have actually gone through electricity data to rebut poor Kumar, and they find out that this is not true. So welcome to a special episode of Scroll Ideas with Shoaib Daniyal with me, that's me. We're going to be shooting special because we're shooting in front of a live audience at the bookshop in Delhi, and we're going to be discussing this very interesting book, Love, Jihad and Other Fictions, with Sreenivasan Jain, who we're just going to call Vasu to make time. And Mariyam. Hi, Vasu and Mariyam.
Hi.
Right. Love Jihad is not true.
That's why we want everyone to buy the book to find out. Yeah, it's revealed right at the end of the last page.
So tell us what you found about the sort of hysteria around Love Jihad and why it's not true.
Okay. So firstly, thanks Shoaib for having us, and in a way it's nice to be at a sort of a scroll event, because one of the co-authors of this book, as you know, and perhaps others as well, is Supriya Sharma, who is of course with Scroll and unfortunately isn't here at the moment. I believe she's on the election trail. So
She's in Uttar Pradesh.
She happens to be in Uttar Pradesh, as all political journalists tend to be at this time of the year. And in a way, this book is a product of collaborative journalism. So we are here representing it, but Supriya is also very much part of this. So Love Jihad, Shoaib, is of course one of the many themes that we tackle in the book. But before we get into like the specifics of these different theories that we tackle, I think it's important to pick up from the point you made about this bogey of special concessions to Muslims or special favors to Muslims, which in a sense informs our public discourse today. And so our book is very much a kind of reaction to this current moment, where we see this slide into a majoritarian autocracy, our country sliding into a majoritarian autocracy, and where elections have never felt more consequential. That this is not just about who wins or loses, but now this has literally become about whether we will continue to remain a broadly secular, an imperfectly secular, imperfectly liberal democracy. One of the reasons for that slide, of course, there are many reasons for that slide. One of the reasons for that slide is the perpetuation by the current ruling establishment of the big lie of Hindu khatre mein hai. Hindus, the majority is under risk. Now, we're seeing the impact of this big lie across the world. We've seen how it can destabilize societies and unsettle democracies. Look at what's happened in America, where the big lie of a stolen election has unsettled that democracy. And where again you have all kinds of fear-mongering about the majority being taken over by the minority, which is coming from the highest level. And I guess our book is a product of that same phenomenon here, where these sorts of divisive theories, whether it's love jihad, whether it's the idea of special favors to Muslims, Muslim appeasement as it's called, or the idea of a Christian's conspiracy to overwhelm Hindus, is being platformed no longer by, WhatsApp forwards or as part of, let's say, the chai pe charcha that you were having with your friend Kumar. But that particular example you gave was actually platformed by Yogi Adityanath at a rally in Uttar Pradesh. So it's got that level of amplification. We actually mentioned this in our introduction, that same theory, look at how it travels, through the wormhole of the information pipelines, was part of a WhatsApp forward which alleged that in the movie Sholay, in the fictional village of Ramgarh, more electricity was supplied to the Muslim area versus the Hindu area. So Thakur was wandering around in the dark while namaz was playing in the Muslim area of Ramgarh. Why? Because the writers of Sholay were Muslim, Javed Akhtar and Salim Javed. So that's why ye hua. Now cut to Yogi Adityanath platforming this from the election stage to the point where we as political journalists had to actually do the data dive to counter that. Now, we know that politicians like to make up things on the election stage. You campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. But there's a difference between, say, making up things about the Prime Minister stopping the Ukraine war, right? War rukwa diya, papa, and allowed the students to come back. Now, that's not great. But that's still part of the kind of broad, magical thinking we allow our politicians during elections. But when you start platforming deeply divisive theories which stoke this idea of the majority under threat, which target minorities, and you're even passing them into law, then that is poisoning our communal well, it's dividing India, it's having real life consequences for millions of Indians, minorities particularly. And so our idea was to, because we've done a lot of this work on these theories, when Mariyam and I were in NDTV, and of course, I'm sure all of you at Scroll and Supriya and others working on it, that we put it into a book so that when you're having this, it could be for anybody, it could be for journalists, it could be for ordinary citizens, it could be for people who are fighting about this on WhatsApp, with your neighborhood uncle or your relative or whoever. You have a sort of one-stop shop where you can look at all of these concepts through the dispassionate lens of hard facts and journalistic scrutiny, not opinion, not polemical. And you can push back against this tide of hateful, high-ranking disinformation. So that's kind of where we were coming from.
No, and I think you've done a great job. One thing that I wanted to ask is, when you said you wanted to sort of combat this disinformation, while you guys were reporting, did you ever stop and think this is so obvious? Like, why are people kind of falling for this?
It's true, right? There are points of frustration where you're constantly, because the scale is so huge. And one of my first tasks when we started working on this book was to do a deep dive on social media and pull out all these different posts and forwards that are making the rounds. Because again, the beauty, for the lack of a better word, the beauty of these theories is that it's a hydra-headed monster. There's no clear definition anywhere. Like for love jihad, it's first about luring a woman under the guise of love. Then you say, no, but there's some consensuality there. But no, but there's some consensus, like it's a consensual relationship. No, but what about the crimes against women? What about Aftab and Shraddha? Aftab killed Shraddha. That's also love jihad. But then there is no conversion angle there. There is no, the police hasn't said anything. Then you would go, no, but what about all these people who have like hidden their identity and married Hindu women? But that's happening on the other side as well. So there is no clear definition. That's the major problem. So I had to do a deep dive to figure out what are the claims, first of all. And it is huge, Paraj, and some of them are so obvious and ridiculous. But at the same time, the problem is that most of those have at least claims that we looked at in the book had at least 100 retweets and 100 shares. So there are people who are actually subscribing to that. And like Vasu said, it's not just in the underbelly of social media. These are being platformed by mainstream politicians, which lends it a sense of credibility. Earlier, these, like you said, these conversations have been around for a while. These theories have been around for a while, but at least they were confined to, say, a chai pe charcha between two people.
Right.
But now, when you have politicians saying it out from stage, from election rallies and campaigns, it lends it a sense of legitimacy. Like, oh, this must be true because people in power are claiming it to be so. And also because of the power of social media. No matter how ridiculous you sound, no matter what ridiculous theory you come up with on social media, you'll find at least 10 other people to agree with you. That also gives you a certain sort of confirmation bias, saying, oh, there are so many other people who agree with me as well, so it must be true. So yes, it's ridiculous and it should be obviously false. I think for most people, most well-meaning, logical, rational people, these theories should be wrong. But at the same time, because of the scale and because of the kind of people who are platforming it, it's become difficult to differentiate between what's true and not for the common person.
Right.
So just to add to that, Shoaib, I think what's happened is that, and we actually sort of confronted this ourselves, that if we were to have written a book like this even 10 years ago, we wouldn't have drawn a full house like this. People would have just laughed and said, we know the answer, right? All of this stuff is largely fictional or are exaggerated claims. But that is the big shift which we witnessed over the past decade. That when you have, if you take the example of one of the theories we tackle in the book of the pink revolution,
Right.
where Narendra Modi, then campaigning for the post of Prime Minister in 2014, made the astonishing claim that there was a conspiracy under the UPA government for the large-scale illegal slaughter of cows and their export. Hence the pink revolution. White revolution is the dairy revolution. Pink revolution is because the blood of these cows. I mean, he kind of spelled it out so that it's not left, ambivalent in anyone's mind. Is the color of the meat of the cow as it was slaughtered. Now, this was an extraordinary claim to make, and it had absolutely no basis. But it essentially then triggered this whole wave of, states passing even more stringent anti-cow legislation, anti-cattle slaughter legislation. There were a string of attacks, particularly targeting Muslims. So when the gatekeepers of democracy, who are meant to act as filters against these sorts of falsehoods, actually start to amplify them, it's no surprise that they will gain the kind of virality and traction that they never have. So it's not just politicians, by the way, it's the media as well. So, 90% of, as we know, especially television media, amplifies the talking points of the ruling establishment. So there's a perfect trifecta between a WhatsApp forward, a political speech or a rally, and a primetime debate. And each kind of validate the other, because when you ask for proof and you say, where's the proof? Or they say, look at that speech by so and so. And you ask him and you say, look at the channel, brought it up at night.
Perfectly circular reasoning, like you're just going to go in circles.
So it's a self-enclosed loop where you don't actually have the burden of providing evidence, which is why this is a kind of gauntlet to that, to say, listen, if you actually examine the evidence, a lot of these claims fall apart. But as long as they continue to receive that kind of elevation and that kind of legitimacy, it's going to be very hard to convince people, because it's a very lopsided contest, right, between journalists and fact checkers and ordinary citizens taking on an entire sort of political ruling establishment, which is every day, pushing the stuff
Taking
out.
on the most powerful people in the country with the biggest
loudspeakers
with the book. Yeah. so in a way, so that's the thing. So I think rumors and all sorts of right-wing rumors have always existed. But you're saying now the main difference is a prime ministerial candidate could actually lend credence to them, or it could be discussed on mainstream media. Like I think land jihad was discussed by Sudhir Chaudhary, right?
Yes, of
So
course.
these are done the different types of jihad.
The different types of jihad.
Yes.
Right. So this is this 2014? Is that the inflection according to you guys? That campaign.
I think it is. It's a kind of contentious thing to say, but it's not just something we're saying in the air. we have actually sat and compiled what we call a VIP hate tracker, where we felt because of this huge spike in hate speech by high-ranking leaders, that's why we call it VIP. We're very careful not to, because they always say this is the fringe. So we said we'll only count MPs, ministers, governors, elected officials,
people with real state power.
People with state power, party bosses and so on. Mariyam, many others did all the heavy lifting on it, and I just, took credit at night and come on my show and front-end it. But that convincingly establishes the surge in just hate in general post-2014, an astonishing rise. Of course, a large part of it was the BJP, almost 80-90%. And of course, a large spike in hateful falsehoods of this kind. And in fact, Shoaib, one of the inflection points was, in a sense, just pre-2014 during the Muzaffarnagar riots, which were in 2013, where essentially a false rumor about love jihad triggered that act of violence, that some Muslim youth had done chhed-chhad with a Hindu girl, and they had killed the Muslims. The Hindu youth went and killed the Muslims, and then the Muslim community slaughtered or killed the Hindu youth, and that triggered this extraordinary riot, which changed the political landscape of Western Uttar Pradesh, and which of course was based on a bogus theory. There was no such evidence of any love jihad. In the past, something like that would have still been contained locally. But that particular case was immediately amplified by BJP politicians. They landed up in Muzaffarnagar, they talked it up. There was a Mahapanchayat, if some people remember. A number of those BJP politicians are today stars of its Western Uttar Pradesh landscape. So, in a sense, yes, I think that was an inflection point, and I mean, we're still seeing it play out.
Right. So, we sort of started off with a little bit of, we made light of some of the rumors. But actually, this is really serious. The way you pointed out, love jihad, right? Is leading to a mass communal riot, Western UP.
Pink revolution, where
Pink
led to so
revolution,
many people
led to
being
so many
killed,
lynchings.
led to lynchings over suspicion of cattle theft and cow slaughter. So these are not just theories and just bigoted lies, or these are not benign, innocent WhatsApp forwards anymore. These are lies with the power to kill.
And one of the, again, for me, how 2014 is an inflection is, I think, of course, while it has gone up in magnitude in a huge way, I still think there was violence around, say, interreligious relationships earlier.
Of course.
What has really changed for me and strikingly, and as you guys really pointed in your book, there are now laws that are being made. There are actual assemblies and parliaments are passing laws based on these rumors. You want to unpack some of them?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, as we call it, today's WhatsApp forward, tomorrow's law. There are a series of states that have passed so-called anti-love jihad laws, even though love jihad itself is a category that the Home Ministry has told Parliament is not defined under law.
In fact, as Mariyam said, and I found that very interesting, and you guys also can point out in your book, it's so many things.
Yeah.
One Guwahati cop straight away says an interfaith relationship.
Yes.
Right.
So we filed an RTI to ask different state governments which had passed such a law to define what love jihad is, and many of them wrote back saying we have no such definition. But the police in Assam said it is any case of a Hindu woman marrying a Muslim man is love jihad.
Yes, love jihad is not defined under law, but it's commonly used to describe a relationship between a Hindu woman and a Muslim man.
So the consequence of this legislation, and there's legislation which is linked to love jihad, there is legislation which is linked to, under the bogey of conversions, that Christians are carrying out mass conversions. 2% Christians are overwhelming, 26 million Christians are overwhelming over 1 billion Hindus. There is legislation which, they're talking about now legislation about restricting, birth control population laws, which is again linked to this bogey of Muslim overbreeding. This has devastating consequences, as much as we talk about lynchings and all of that. But under the so-called UP anti-love jihad laws, the data we last had, which was I think till the middle of last year, law was passed in 2020, they'd already registered about 500 cases, appending scores and scores of Hindu-Muslim couples, arresting the Muslim men. Those cases are going to drag on in jail for, in the courts for years, and most of them are going to get thrown out because they're essentially either consensual relationships or there may be some marital strife or some discord where the male partner is Muslim and the woman is Hindu, but that becomes love jihad. So when you bake it into law, its consequences are almost near permanent. So yeah, it's a real,
and it probably has like
escalation,
a million downstream consequences which are not even again lawful, but because once something is lawful, then I mean what does even vigilante action mean in that context, right?
Yeah, immediately after the UP law, UP passed the law, you had this case in Muradabad, and that video had gone viral where you had these right-wing vigilantes confront a woman at the registrar's office saying that paper dikha do hame, tum convert kaise kar rahi ho, ye tum jaise logo ke liye hi ye niyam banaya hai. So you're harassing a woman who's over the age of 18, who is a legal adult, who has chosen to marry a partner of her choice, but her choice doesn't matter. A woman's agency has been denied. That's as a woman as well, that's one of the major things that irks me about the bogies like love jihad, because it's insanely patriarchal, right? A woman, no matter what, even if she comes out and she says it's a consensual relationship, I'm in love with this man, it's immediately dismissed as usko behlaya fuslaya gaya hai. She's been brainwashed. She doesn't know any better. A woman with it's this patriarchal notion that a woman will always be an abla nari. Yeah, she'll always be the abla nari who cannot choose for herself, who cannot decide for herself.
And the tragic thing here, Shoaib, is that because look, it's a complicated thing. When we talk about why these theories gain traction, some of them are outright fictions like love jihad, right? This conspiracy of a Muslim plot to, but others are using a kernel of truth to build a mountain of grievance. Like for example, if you take the idea of Muslim appeasement, and we tackle some of the examples that the right commonly cites, whether it's the Hajj subsidy or some scheme for Muslim graveyards, to build walls around Muslim graveyards in Uttar Pradesh, or some schemes for Muslim clerics in West Bengal or Tamil Nadu. These are all true. These are actual schemes. But they're minuscule compared to the overall outlay of the Indian state. So the idea that you're draining resources, that minorities are draining resources at the expense of the majority, is particularly is tragic, because when you look at the data, Muslims lag behind most communities on virtually every metric: education, literacy, access to jobs, positions in government, police, and of course increasingly in parliament. So far from being a pampered minority, they're actually a deeply backward minority. And this idea, this bogey, this constant citing of appeasement is even further whittling down the resources that are made available to them, to further underscore the real life consequences of these kinds of conspiracy theories. So when the yogi says something like Bijli for Diwali versus Eid and so on and so forth, it's no longer just something which is at the level of divisive rhetoric. We've seen already under the watch of this government how many of the few handful of Muslim-centric schemes that there are and allotments to universities and so on have already been gutted. And this, by the way, is not something unique to this government. I mean, under the UPA, the percentage of allotment to the Ministry of Minority Affairs was, I think, 0.02% of the overall budget, and that's further nosedived. And yet, this constant recycling of special favors, appeasement, and so on.
In fact, I think when you bring up the UPA, I think these sort of things completely shift the field. So even a party who's not necessarily a Hindutva party now is kind of, in a bit of a quandary about what to do with respect to reaching out to what people that might be his own voters, right? So I think as journalists, we all realize a lot of voting in India happens on the basis of community bargaining. Whether it's good or bad, it's how Indian politics takes place, except this means that Muslims can't take part in the game anymore, right? Like, because it'll be appeasement then. So it's a like you're kind of cutting them out of what is this patronage politics. That now they can't be part of the game, because if they are part of the game, then it's cheating, it's appeasement, and so on and so forth.
No, I mean, it's true. Like you said, there is a reason why these theories are being platformed by mainstream politicians as well, right? Because they have realized that, according to me at least, I think they've realized that fear is it's an opium of sorts. Afeem chata do logo ko, you will get the votes that you need. It's easy to sell fear, and it's easy to flip people to your side, and which is why such rhetorics, you'll see a spike in such rhetoric, because we have that hate speech tracker that we look at. Such hate and hateful lies, usually you see a spike in those around the time of elections. Even today, if you all rush back home at 8 o'clock, you can watch Kerala Story on DD National, which is being aired today. Now, this is a movie again based on Love Jihad. The directors had initially claimed that 32,000 women in Kerala have gone missing and have fallen prey to Love Jihad, but in court they said they will come up with a disclaimer saying that there is no authentic data. From 32,000 they dropped down to 3 women, but it's still a movie that's being pushed out on DD National so that it reaches the hinterlands, it reaches the common man, it reaches the voters who may not be able to know, they may not know the context behind it, or what happened in court, that these numbers were disproven, these theories don't really exist. But if you have DD National airing that out, you have union ministers coming out on Twitter and supporting the airing of that movie around the time, essentially what is the eve of elections, there is they're doing this for a reason.
In fact, there's just such a normalization. I think so many times when there is some sort of violence around an interfaith relationships, so many headlines will run with the phrase "Love Jihad," right? Like,
yeah, it's now passed into common parlance, and this is actually another sort of trigger for the book. That what has happened is that these theories, which essentially can be disproven through facts and through the conventional tools of journalistic scrutiny, are now carried as if they are real, or they're framed in that classic primetime dodge of a debate. Love jihad, is it true or not? Population jihad, is it true or not? Now the thing is, you can easily go and find out for yourself. You don't have to raise this as a question. But essentially, what we attempted to do was to sort of put a definitive stamp on it, that given the available information, you can actually go out and establish what is the basis of it. Again, if you take this question of this long running bogey of the Muslim population takeover, which as we found goes back almost 100 years, where a figure of the Hindu right in the early 19th century actually forecast that Hindus are going to become extinct. Not just that they will be overwhelmed, but they'll become extinct. They seem to be doing very well. 100 years later, Colonel U.C. Mukherjee was his name. But the available data, and the theory still persists, because the available data does show that Muslim fertility rate is higher than of most other religions. Their growth rate is higher than of other religions. Contraception usage amongst Muslims is higher. So what you can do is you can selectively take that and then run with it. While actually, if you just look at historic data, you just go back 10-15 years, and you can see in all these metrics, Muslims are actually improving in terms of the fertility rate and the growth rate is coming down, contraception usage is going up, and so this bogey of kind of takeover is completely false. But you will not see that on prime time, or you will not hear that from the election stage. You will still see it presented as a kind of open-ended thing. So the idea was to sort of say, listen, let's stop treating this as a debate. If we use love jihad, let's say it's supposed love jihad or so-called love jihad, put it in quotes. I mean, keep qualifying it, or all these different theories, with riders to indicate that, it's not now just something that you take for granted as true.
You guys raised this idea that there is a change in how powerful leaders approach this. I think earlier there was sort of a circumspection. You could have like a district level leader doing it, but a prime minister wouldn't.
Yes.
One interesting thing that you brought about Kerala was the sort of the idea of love jihad starts actually from a court. What is the role that the justice system, the police and the court, which is not necessarily beholden to popular politics in a way that a neta is, what role do you find it playing in this ecosystem?
So Supriya did some amazing work on that. So the term love jihad essentially, though there's a little debate about who first came up with the term love jihad, whether it was the right wing or whether it was the Christians in Kerala. But what we know for sure is that it was the first sense of the seal of legitimacy that it was given was in a 2009 judgment by the Kerala High Court, where they used the term love jihad and Romeo jihad. It was essentially two interfaith couples, a Hindu girl and a Christian girl marrying two Muslim men. Their families had approached court saying that our daughters are missing, etc. And when they came to court, initially they did say that they want to go back with their husbands, but despite that, the court ordered that they go with their parents. Again, that whole patriarchal idea that I was talking about. The women were sent back with their parents, and later, the second hearing, when they come back to court, we don't know what transpired while they were at home. They come back to court and they say that, no, we don't want to go with our husbands anymore, we'll stay with our family. And it is during this case that initially Justice, please remind me, Shankaran said that asked the Kerala police to investigate if there's something called love jihad happening in Kerala. The police on at least 2 different occasions came back to court with responses saying that they have found nothing of the sort. There is nothing to prove a conspiracy. But they said, now what the mistake, if you may call it so, what that the police did was, though there are no confirmed reports of love jihad or any such network operating in the state, there are unconfirmed sources and rumors and reports circulating. Now, later, you need to read the book to know the nitty-gritties of the case. It's a really interesting case because Supriya went down and tracked down one of the Muslim men in the case, and this is one of the first time you hear from him. He hasn't spoken to the media before, so you've never even heard his version of the story until now. This was in 2009, so this is about 15 years later. This is the first time you're hearing the man who is at the center of this case actually speak out what actually happened. We have, in fact, gone through some files. We have details of the exchanges between the women and the men, etc. And it's a really interesting case that you need to look at. But what happened was later, a different judge comes into the case and he actually dismisses the case because saying there is no evidence. But despite that, the right wing keeps saying that, oh, but this is not something we have said. The Kerala High Court spoke of love jihad in 2009. It's the Kerala High Court's terminology to call it love jihad. But what they don't tell you is that just, I think, into the early 2010, the case was dismissed for lack of evidence.
So
this is exactly what you pointed out, the circularity of rumors. The rumor was buttressed by a rumor by the Kerala.
No, so here actually, in this case, the only difference was that subsequently another judge, Justice Nambiar, as Mariyam mentioned, came and actually closed the case and the men were discharged. But the right will only selectively cite the earlier Justice Sankaran order, not the Justice Nambiar order. So that's also part of how they control the information pipelines. But just to quickly add to that point about the courts, which is a very good question, about the role of the courts, the police and so on, that the courts have played a very, very, I would say, troubling role in the wider context of the ecosystem of these sorts of majoritarian theories. In some cases, yes, you've had judges who've come and struck down some of these, sort of bad faith orders and so on. But in other cases, they've actually perpetuated it. And this Kerala example is perfect. Take, for example, the question of conversions, right? You have a number of highly draconian laws, anti-conversion laws, which make conversion virtually impossible. You've written about it, and we've quoted you in the book, because of the nature in which they've been worded.
Right.
Now, when these laws were first passed in the 50s, right after independence, and by the way, these was not necessarily BJP governments passing it, it went to court, and in what is now known as the Stanislaus verdict, the court actually upheld some of those early laws passed by state governments such as Odisha and Madhya Pradesh. And that emboldened then the subsequent flood of legislation that followed, which has made conversion very hard. Now, of course, you've had now subsequently high court orders in different states which are striking down some of these provisions. and so on and so forth. But it's been a problem. Similarly with the police, because if you look at some of these comments that are made, inflammatory, baseless claims about this jihad or that jihad, or about the idea that, you're going to have some kind of potential riot between communities. If there had been swift action, right? I mean, India does have laws that broadly regulate hate speech. You would have seen some difference. But where do you ever hear of any of these hate-mongering leaders or politicians facing any consequences? Take the election commission. I mean, forget taking action against saying that, Modi ji ne war rukwa diya, which is a claim debunked by the foreign ministry. Look at some of the other sorts of claims being made from the election stage, and you again have enough legislative teeth there to act. But again, like as I said, the gatekeepers of democracy, all these institutions, are not, rising to the occasion. So
you guys had earlier raised, I think, we live in such a world where I can really travel half around the world to quote that old Mark Twain quote. Except now you have social media. Do you think your book, the world that your book describes, could have existed without social media?
I mean, social media has definitely exacerbated the situation. Like I said, because another event that we had a little earlier, a member from the audience said that when she was younger, there was this concert, this event in a certain part of UP. She was Muslim herself, and she said that every time during Azan around Maghrib time, which is the sunset time, the sunset prayers, power would go off, and she had and her being, the angsty teenager, she thought that this is a conspiracy against her community, etc. And her father explained that was not so. There was a slightly very logical reasoning to it. It was the usual power cut time or whatever. It was just coinciding and all that. And so there, what had happened was, because this happened, say, 15 years ago, 15 years ago, she didn't take to social media to share that. She spoke to her family, it was immediately nipped in the bud. Today, if a young teenager wants to go online and say the same thing, you will find 10 other people who's agreeing with him or her. So social media has exacerbated it because it makes the traveling of such falsehoods much faster. You find other people to support what you say, which gives it a sense of legitimacy because you feel, I'm not the only one who thinks this, which is why you see a huge rise in all sorts of conspiracy theories these days. And another thing, because of social media, even not just commoners, you might even find, if there are 10 people agreeing with you, of those maybe 5 or 6, maybe even mainstream politicians. That again gives you a sense of, I'm right. So yes, social media has made it a lot worse. But these existed much before that as well.
Do you think there's also some top-down push for social media? So what you described is like a bottom-up thing almost. Are there paths that
I have a slightly like a different take on this, because I think we invest a lot in terms of how social media is playing a role in the current moment.
Right.
But we know this, right? That rumors and falsehoods have always had a virality. They just took different forms. There were always some rumor or some baseless claim that would incite a riot or trigger some kind of communal divide or whatever it was. Without taking away from the fact that obviously you have a different kind of metabolism that social media gives to life, but without taking away from the fact that, to the point of the top down, which to me remains the most significant shift. For example, many people tend to forget this. When we talk about this fear-mongering over the cow, in 1966, there was actually I don't even call it an attack on Parliament. There was a lot of mobilization by the Hindu right on the question of cow protection, and a mob marched to Parliament where some of the speakers at that time included members of Parliament of the BJP, who were again the sort of the early equivalents of the Yogi Adityanath, who gave very insightful speeches. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was at that time a member of Parliament, who sensed the potential risks of that moment. This idea of cow protection being such an incendiary part of the Indian cultural or political fabric, actually called for the standing down of the mob and asked his own MP to stand down. They didn't listen. They went for it. There was firing. I think about 8 people were killed. I think a couple of policemen were also killed. They actually managed to break or breach the gates of Parliament. And you talk about the Parliament attack. This was a oft forgotten chapter in our public history. But as I said, the difference is a man who would later go on to become a prime minister still felt the need to signal alarm and subsequently tried to distance himself and his party from what happened. Today, you have a prime minister who's unafraid of amplifying these same, the very same, very dangerous divisive theories. So I think, of course, you can have a ground up, but as long as you have this tap from the top, which is constantly flowing.
Okay. Last question. I want you to just beat up our own tribe. What have journalists done, and how have they exacerbated? Because again, like when you said, when somebody cites the quote as a source for love jihad, I feel that a rumor or fake news has the most strength when there is an actual URL behind it. It's not some tweet. If someone says, XXX has reported on it, I mean, that's a pretty powerful argument, right?
Yeah. So, Mariyam can actually cite the exact figures, but if you take, for example, when you're trying to look around, I mean, first the obvious, obviously we know the extent to which the mainstream media is amplifying and platforming this. But when we were looking for proof of love jihad, because who actually owns this theory? That's the other challenge, right? Who do you actually ask saying, is this true or not? We went to the VHP as one of the stakeholders in the love jihad ecosystem and said, where's the proof? And they said, amongst other things, you can read their answers, interesting answers in the book. They said, here's a list. We've compiled a list of about 170 odd cases of love jihad. When you looked at the list, it was nothing more than a Google search of media reports that it used love jihad, and they just compiled that into an Excel sheet. So it was essentially this perfect little echo chamber where you generate a theory, the media then reports it as verbatim, and then you cite it yourself as proof of the validation of that theory. So
perfect circle, right?
Yeah. In fact, like the 150 cases that the VHP list had, so we looked at one of the things that when we were analyzing that list, one of the things that we looked at is where did the allegation of love jihad come from? Did the girl say it? Did the woman say it? Did her family say it? Was it a Hindutva group? And what was interesting was you can read the exact numbers in the book and you can see what we found, but there is a large chunk of cases where it was branded love jihad by the media themselves. They've used love jihad as a stand-in term for interfaith relationships. So you've immediately in the entire copy, you will not find a single quote of the family or the woman or any organization calling it love jihad, but the headline says, UP में एक और love jihad का case या एक और love jihad का मामला सामने आया है, because they branded it love jihad themselves.
And Hindi is so evocative, you really want to believe it. Like it's such a poetic language.
And love jihad itself is such a catchy term, right?
Yeah.
I think in another one of our book conversations, someone's saying, can't you come up with a counter term? Sort of, counter it, but in a catchier way. Not just through these dry facts, but you need a sort of catchy slogan. So, anyway.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for our discussion, but we're going to open up the floor for some questions for the audience. We'll take a few questions.
Were there any other very viral falsehoods that didn't make the cut in this book? Perhaps if the research didn't come together in time, or if there was a different challenge?
Yeah, it's, as we said, there's always a kind of jihad a minute landscape. The Assam Chief Minister actually came up with something called fertilizer jihad. This is funny but also sadly true. There's some kind of theory that Muslim horticulturalists in Assam are using fertilizer which is poisoning Hindus. So yes, there were many theories that we didn't tackle. What we thought we'd do is just whittle it down to, in a sense, the quote-unquote mother theories from which many of these other offshoots emanate, which are essentially fundamental to the idea of minority overwhelming majority. But yeah, it was, like we said, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You debunk one and then five spring up. So.
She has an interesting one. Video game. That was the
Video game jihad. As in the Muslims are
Oh,
really
that's
good at
right.
playing video games.
No, I think there was something called PUBG Jihad or something.
Oh my God.
Where there are Muslim gamers sitting in Pakistan who, through video games, are attempting to seduce and convert Hindu women in India. So,
This seems like
this
a
is-
takeoff from the Seema Haider case because that's actually what happened, except the other way around.
yeah, exactly.
So right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Whoever. Yeah.
Congratulations on the book and also on exiting NDTV in good time. I have two short questions. One is, in your research, what have you found was the reaction or the coping mechanism of the minority communities, especially Muslims, considering this relentless barrage of myth? And the other question is, has your book been translated into regional languages? Because it ought to be read, I think, by wider sections.
That's a good point.
You want to take it?
So, the tone of the book, like Vasu has said, it's sort of, it's based on fact. We've tried to be as dispassionate and like lack of no emotions per se in the book. It's all about the fact. This is what they are saying, but this is the fact as is available. So there is not much about how people are responding to these bigoted lies in the book, but of course, when in not just Muslims, when I traveled to Karnataka to look at, this was after an MLA in Karnataka gave this very impassioned speech in Vidhan Sabha saying that his mother had been forcefully converted to Christianity. There are many in his constituency who have been forcefully converted. This is Gulihati Shekhar. So I traveled all the way down to his constituency, met his mother and others in his constituency who had supposedly converted. You can see what she says and what the others there say. But one of the first things that I noticed when I went to speak to people in the constituency is that there's a certain level of distrust. They don't know who you are. They don't want to, especially when you ask questions about religion, conversion, because they know this has become such a big issue. And
This is a Christian
Christian
part of the
Christian part of
District,
Karnataka,
yeah.
and a lot of them had converted to Christianity or followed Christianity. And there's a certain level of distrust and fear there. And I think one thing that helped me was, interestingly, a lot of them spoke Malayalam and I speak Malayalam. It's only when I spoke in a regional South Indian language that they eased up a bit. But even then, there were constant questions about, because I wanted to record their audios for my notes. They were like, oh, are you going to play my audio out somewhere? Will somebody hear my voice about what I'm saying? You had to reassure them 5, 6, 7 times before they were willing to talk to you. In fact, one of the women that we interviewed and who's there in the book is that Gulihati Shekhar, the MLA, had gone on to do a ghar wapsi of his mother and certain other members from his constituency. They were welcomed back into the Hindu fold. I've spoken to one of the women who was part of that group. You can see what she says about what happened. But there is a huge distrust, even among neighbors. I was accompanied by somebody in that locality. Even then, there is a sense of fear. Yes, for sure.
So just to add to that, as Mariyam said, we didn't actually sort of get the sense of the community. We weren't really treating it as that kind of exercise, but we chronicled the impact of these falsehoods. Like if you take the example of the Love Jihad chapter, where we've actually gone and looked at, because we couldn't fact check all the arrests made by the UP police under the so-called Love Jihad law. We could just do a dipstick survey. So we did about 5 or 6 surveys, 5 or 6 stories, and you get a clear sense of what has happened there in the context of these interfaith couples where the Muslim men are being picked up and arrested, and what that means to the to the community. So, but beyond that, I think we all know, even without necessarily talking to minorities and so on, what's going on with them, right? Like it's been such a clear shift. About translation, yes, we are very much hoping that this book is going to be translated. The translation rights are with the publisher. They're in touch with different, language publishers, and hopefully that should happen soon. So,
Yeah, I think that will already be fulfilling the aim of the book.
no, we very much
Right.
want that, but these things take time, and so.
Yeah, the lady in green.
I have a question about the impact of these anti-conversion laws in recent times on interfaith couples. So, legitimate reason to want to convert in some circumstances. I'm interested in understanding whether you had a chance to reflect on that relationship between an individual and religion when you spoke to the couples who have been affected by UP's anti-conversion law. Do the women in these relationships is the law changing their idea of what it means to be in an interfaith relationship, or is there clarity that this is my relationship, this is a personal matter, and converting for it is not wrong?
Right, that's a great question. In fact, we were looking at some of these cases even before the UP law kicked in, because as we point out in the book, that when you have the context of the Special Marriage Act, which requires that you have to post in advance the fact that you are converting for the purpose of marriage, that is like a homing beacon for everybody from the right wing to aggrieved families to descend on the couple and essentially then disrupt that marriage or worse. So you then have a situation where the couples may want to convert one or the other in order to evade that, right? And Mariyam had actually done that, a ground report from Uttar Pradesh, where some of these couples had actually escaped to Delhi. These were from, I think, Kanpur.
Kanpur, yeah.
Because of this bogey and because of this very kind of worrisome provision of the Special Marriages Act. But it was quite extraordinary that these young women, because there's this constant sense that why is it only that the women are converting? Why not the men, right? That's what's commonly used, saying ki chalo theek hai, even if it's consensual, why are Hindu women converting to Islam?
Yeah.
And I think one couple she interviewed, they said literally it was like a negotiation. The man said, I'll convert.
Yeah.
Right? And the woman said, I'll, and then finally
So it was
one of them prevailed. So
it was this very young couple from Kanpur. I had gone and met them in the context of Kanpur had seen one of the first special investigative teams being set up by the UP government to look into a clutch of interfaith marriages, which they alleged were cases of love jihad. So they all from nearby localities. So they said there is some network happening there. You need to investigate this. There were a clutch of 14 or 11 cases, like 10 plus cases, and more than half of them were already shut, and more than half of the remaining were on the brink of collapse. So one couple that I'd met, they had escaped to Delhi, and again speaking to that sense of fear, they refused to meet me at their home. It was a very clandestine thing, because she said she would not talk to anybody but me, which meant I didn't even take a camera person with me. I recorded her on my phone. They said they would meet me at a public place, so we met in front of the Delhi Jama Masjid, because they didn't want me to know where they even lived, because they were scared.
Right.
So one of the questions I did ask her was, there is the Special Marriage Act for interfaith couples, why not go for that? So they said the problem is that there is a notice that is sent to your address, and because my address is my parents' address, they would, and interfaith marriages in India is still it's a fragile relationship. It's not very easily accepted by a lot of parents and families in our country still. So she said there was no way they would have allowed me to marry Faisal. So we had to then go for one of the personal marriages under one of the personal laws, and we said we'd convert. And so I said, no, but why did you convert? Why not him? And he immediately jumped in and said, ma'am, maine bola tha. I said I will convert, but she cut me off and said she wants to convert. And then here now speaking to what you said, so Shalini said that I'd been seeing this man for a while, and whatever reason, and even before I started dating him, Muslim friends or whatever, and I was interested in Islam. I'd started reading up about it, and even before I decided to marry him, I thought I would like to convert, and he has no such this thing. He's agreeing to convert only because of me. I'm not agreeing to convert only because of him. I have some other reasons as well, or whatever. And religion is a very personal matter. So I immediately asked him to stop and not do it, and I would convert. And what didn't make into our visual story or anything is the little interaction between the couple, right? So like, you could see how she was much more what we would call a practicing Muslim than even the man. Like something like as simple as she wanted to drink a glass of water. So in Islam, you say that if you're drinking or eating, you should sit down before you drink and eat. So the man stood up and chugged a bottle of water, passed on the bottle to her. She looked around. She found a little corner of the footpath, sat down, and then drank the water. So it was, you could tell that this was not just that because of a relationship that she's converted.
Cool. We're gonna take a last question. Lady. Sorry. First come, first go.
Rumors exist because they're backed by hard evidence. So like the 1817 cartilage issue where, even though it was just a rumor, people believed it because they saw around them that the British were suppressing their culture. So are there any like hard, concrete evidences that will make the skeptics believe that love jihad is real and is maybe a poison for our country?
So, in the context of love jihad, I would have to say no. When I say no, this is a qualified no, because something like love jihad is virtually impossible to fact check because it has no clear definition and it exists in a seemingly infinite ecosystem where, and this has already happened to us, that the book has come out and we've tried to isolate every major example of love jihad, try to fact check a list, go back to the original case. In other words, try as best as possible to create a universe that you can debunk or you can fact check. Put that out, and my Twitter timeline, and I'm sure Mariyam's and Supriya's as well, is just flooded with, so no one has reacted to what we've done. No one has questioned that. But I'm getting hundreds of tweets of, but what about that case where Pranav pretended to be Parvez and then married a Hindu girl, etc., etc. So that's a never-ending thing. But I would say that broadly based on most of the available information on the major cases, on all the major sort of reference points of what constitutes love jihad, you can turn around and say that it's bogus. But to your point, the tap is never going to get turned off, A, because of the high level amplification it gets, and B, because it's not been defined in any way that you can actually put a limit on the universe. So you can go on generating
Infinite number
of
jihads,
cases.
right.
Yeah. So that's a sort of.
And also, I think it presupposes that there is some one supreme leader who is giving the community this idea that, look, I'm going to be sending my Muslim men to go out and do all of this. What the question is there an intent behind wooing Hindu women into a fold of communally minded relationship with the idea of conversion? I would think of it as an independent. It's something between two people, right? So if somebody has defrauded someone and gotten them to convert, there is no giant conspiracy going on at the.
Exactly. So with all of these instances, like for example, even with the idea of forcible conversion and so on and so forth, are there bad actors out there?
Of course, sure,
where there would be isolated cases of malpractice? Sure. But the wider idea of this huge interlinked conspiracy is, there's just simply no evidence of that. So
Well-funded conspiracy, that's part of the,
Maybe you could take one last question.
One last question.
Yeah,
Okay.
so during your research, did you notice that couples of a certain socio-economic background were targeted, or was it just across all the board?
I think we would broadly safe to say that you would find that it was mostly couples who fall within the slightly more like the lower to middle economic.
I think the ones who are harassed, yes. I think that's the qualifier. Like the ones that's picked up in headlines, etc., who are being harangued by right-wing activists at the registrar's office, etc., are from, mostly, not all, many of them are from a certain socioeconomic background. But that's also because in our country, a sense of agency is very much linked to our socioeconomic background.
But I think the one qualifier is that the landscape changes somewhat as you go from north to south. So if you look at some of the so-called cases of couples in the south who are harassed, including the quote-unquote original patient zero case of love jihad in Kerala, they would come from what could be called reasonably
Middle class.
affluent to middle-class families. But in the north, the landscape is somewhat different.
So the one story that I've covered for SMA is I've done a report on
SMA?
The Special Marriage Act.
Special Marriage Act, right?
So they had married and this whole notice had gone out, and a mob had actually approached the woman of the father of the bride, to-be bride, and he happened to be a very powerful person, and he instead of getting intimidated, he actually gave it to them and saying, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say the words. And he was from Ghaziabad also, so it was like a nuclear combination. But it was clearly the fact that he was, if I remember correctly, I did this 3 years back. He was, I think, the son of a DM or something like that. So he was coming from a position of immense power.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the girl was the granddaughter of a judge.
Girl was the granddaughter of the judge. Wow, I
He
reported
remembers the story better than you, Shoaib.
Not
You,
great.
you just been fact-checked in real time. But I just want to say one last thing. This is like not directly linked to the book, because I think what tends to happen around these conversations is that the sense is that what we're going through at the moment, which is how I sort of started, we started the conversation, the idea of this slipping into a majoritarian autocracy, is something that largely affects Muslims or minorities. And of course it does, and we can't turn away from that. But right now, as we speak, there are so many examples of how this is not just affecting minorities, right? When you make that shift, then no one is safe. And if you look at what has happened with, all these different actors who've flirted with the ruling establishment, thinking that if we play along, we'll be safe, not going to happen. Right? So look at what has happened to Kejriwal. Look at what has happened to Sonam Wangchuk, who was a supporter of this government. Fasting in Ladakh, nobody in Delhi, no one part of the establishment gave a damn. Look at what has happened to the women wrestlers, Olympic champions. And again, many of them were aligned to the ruling establishment. But when you're sexually harassed, you make allegations of sexual harassment against a ruling party member of parliament, suddenly you're on your own. So I think it's important for people to understand that this is not just something which is solely a Muslim problem or a minority problem. When these safeguards, when the guardrails of democracy start to come off, then it's open season on everyone. So,
we're going to wrap up. The book is Love, Jihad and Other Fictions. Thank you so much. If you like what you saw, please go to Scroll.in/contribute and become a member of Scroll.
And also buy
Buy
the
the
book.
book.
Buy the book.